Week 4, Game Building Exercises. Exercise 1, Multi-Directional Animated Movement. We'll be using a pre-created project for these exercises. I've already opened this project, so you can go ahead and open this project as well. Alright, so for the first exercise, you're going to be doing what's called multi-directional animated movement. Now the character in this particular project has already been pre-created and set up to move. So what we're going to do to start off is we're just going to run the game so you can see how things work. Now you'll notice there's a character near the center of the screen. He's moving, he's standing to the right, and if I move the keys, he'll move to the right. And if I move up, down, left, and right, he'll move those directions as well. But there's a problem. He really just keeps running all the time, and he's not turning in the proper direction. So we'll go ahead and we'll fix that. So we'll close the running game. Now in the running game, you should have noticed that the character was shown as running all the time. And that's normal with GameMaker, as animated sprites are meant to animate immediately when they're started. In this case, we really don't want the character to be moving until we push the key. So we're going to go ahead and fix that first. So we'll go ahead and open the player object. And in here we're going to add a create event. And we're going to add an assign variable action. The variable we're going to be using here is a built-in variable. It's called image speed. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's the speed at which the image will animate. A 0 indicates it will not animate, and a 1 is full speed. And you can change that variable number to change the speed that you want the image to animate at. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run the game again here, and I'll show you that the character now will not be moving. Even if I move the keys, he doesn't animate because we haven't told it to. We need to add this variable to one other location. We need to add it to the key down, no key event to make sure it stops animating when we let the keys up. So I'm going to right click on the create event and duplicate it. And I'll duplicate it as a key down, no key event. Alright, so we've got this set up so that the character won't animate when it's created and when no keys are pressed. Now what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the keyboard commands so that they animate correctly. So we'll open the key down left event. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of variables to this to make things work more correctly. So under the jump to point action, we'll add an assign variable. Once again, this will be the image speed. And we'll set it to 1 this time so it animates at full speed. And the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the correct sprite is used. So in this case, this is a multi-directional sprite, so it has sprites that show it moving to the right, to the left, up, and down. So what we need to do is use one of the different sprites that we've created. I'll show you for a moment in our resources tab that we have 4 different sprites that we've set up. One showing the player running down, one running up, one running to the right, and one to the left. I'll go ahead and I will open the one running to the left, and you'll notice here it's composed of 6 different sprites. If I hit the run for this, it'll show the character running. So this will be the sprite that we're going to be setting the object to use once we have press the left key. So in this particular case, let me go ahead and add a new action. This is going to be called Set Sprite. It's this command here. Under Sprite, we'll do the chooser, and I'll choose the left sprite. And we want to make sure that the frame, this indicates at which frame in the sprite we're going to be using when we press the key. In this case, we want to put relative because we want to make sure that the frame stays at the position that it was at the last time it was used. If we don't do this, it will cause the sprite to not animate when we press the keys. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this. And we should notice when we move to the left, the character starts moving in an animated fashion. Now if I press the other keys, you'll notice nothing happens because we haven't told those to animate correctly yet. Now you need to go ahead and set up the other 3 keys to animate correctly using this particular one that we set up as your guide. Once you're done with this, go ahead and run the game one more time. And you should be able to move the character around the screen, and it should be animating in each of the 4 directions. Exercise 2, Instance Creation Actions. Now there's going to be times when you're creating games that you're going to want different instances of an object to contain different information from other instances when it's created. For example, you know when an instance is created in a game room, each of those instances can have different X and Y coordinates. But it can't have a different sprite. It has to use the sprite that the object originally came with. And in order to overcome this, we're going to be using a special feature in GameMaker known as Instance Creation Code. So go ahead and let's open Room 0. And let me close the room editor for a moment in this window, and I'm going to zoom in a little more here. Now in this room, we have these 2 instances of the object. This is known as Object Portal. Now each of these currently has a different X and Y coordinate point. Now what we're going to do for this particular exercise is we're going to set it up so that when our character moves to a portal, it should be transported to the other portal automatically. Now to do this, we need to be able to tell this instance that it needs to move the character to this location. Now we also want this portal down in the bottom right to be able to move the character to this position. Now when we created the object itself, we couldn't easily place 2 bits of different information in here unless we'd used a question, an if statement. And that's not the most efficient way, especially if we had numerous portals throughout the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something called Instance Creation Code. And you access this by clicking on one of the instances. We'll right click on it, see if I can get this to work. Actually a double click, there we go. Let me zoom this out so we can see it a little better here. And down in the bottom right of the new window that opens, there's this button called Creation Code. And you should notice that it opens a new window. It's the action window that we normally see when we're working with objects. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to add some actions in order to give this instance the needed information to move the character. So here we're going to do an assign variable action, and we're going to create a user variable. We're going to call this go_to_x. In this case, it's going to tell the character what x position to go to. I'm going to use the value 894 because that's a position underneath the right-hand variable. Now I'm going to click this little plus sign to the left of assign variable. What this allows us to do is assign multiple variables at the same time. So down below here, I'm going to type go_to, in this case y, and give it a value 610. So what we've done here is we've assigned two separate variables using the same action. Now this would be exactly the same as doing this. Let me remove that and bringing another assigned variable over here called go_to y 610. So the previous way I showed is just a shortcut way of doing this exact two actions as well. Now in order to use this information, we need to make some changes to the portal object. So I'm going to go ahead and close the room. I'm going to open the portal object. And I'm going to add an event in here. When the player collides with the portal, we want something to happen. We'll also use an assigned variable here, and we're going to be setting the first name here to other.x. Now what this indicates is we are wanting to look at that other thing, the thing that collided with us, in this case, the player. So the player has collided with the portal. Then we're saying we want to assign the x variable of the player. So in this case, we are referring to the x coordinate in the player instance. The value we want to change this to is go_to_x. So the portal contains this value, go_to_x. It will then assign this value to the player object. So in instance, what's going to happen is the player's x position will suddenly change from the upper left of the screen to the left of the screen to the right of the screen. We need to go ahead and do this as well for the y position. So we'll type other.y and go_to_y. Go ahead and run the game now, and we'll test this. So if I take my player and I move them and I move up and touch the portal in the upper left corner, my character will have moved down to the bottom right hand side. Now this portal we haven't set up yet, so if we touch it with our character, we'll get an error. And the reason we get an error is because this portal instance does not have any creation code in it for the go_to_x and go_to_y. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to abort this. And what we need to do is we need to go back to room 0, and we need to go to this portal. We need to double click on it, open up the creation code, and give it the correct information to move the player to below the portal over here. So what I'll do is I'm going to move my mouse pointer up below the pointer, or below the portal, and then I'm going to look down in this corner here while the mouse is sitting up here, and I'm going to see what the position is. In this case it's 129 by 153. So for the creation code over here, I'll go ahead and do an assigned variable, go_to_x 123. And add another one. Go to Y. 153, I think it was. And then I'll run the game. And when I touch this portal, it should move me below the other one. But you'll notice it's jumping back to the original position. That's because I made a mistake and I made it a little too close. So let me place it a little further below. So I'll go to the 200 Y position. I'll run it again. And now when I go to this portal, I should move underneath the other portal. So I can jump back and forth between each of the portals. Exercise 3, triggering and changing states. Now, there's going to be a lot of times in a game when you're going to want to do things like hide or unhide an object. For instance, if you're touching a sign, you may want the sign to show something, and then when you're not touching it, it doesn't show something. What we're going to do for this exercise is we're going to be making some text appear on the screen when the player presses the space bar. The text will stay on the screen until the player touches the space bar again. These two different items, the text staying on the screen and the text going away, are known as states. So what we're going to be doing is allowing the player to change between two different states, showing the text and hiding the text. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the player object back up again and open the create event. And we're going to be adding a variable in here. I'm going to call this variable display message. And it'll initially be set to the value 0. 0 indicates don't display the message, and 1 will indicate display the message. We're going to then add a key press space event. And in here we're going to assign a series of questions and some assigning of variables to make sure that we can adjust the state of the message. So we'll start off by doing an if variable. So this variable is going to check what display message is holding. So we'll type display message in the variable. We'll set it to equal, and the value will be 1. So we're going to say if variable is set to 1, we're going to assign the variable display message back to 0. So what this is doing is if I press the space bar, it should check to see if, in this case, the message is on and turn it off. Now here I need to put an exit because I don't want the rest of the commands in this set of actions to be executed. Now I need to be able to handle what if the display message is a 0 or in the off position. I need to turn it on. So I need to do another if variable. Once again, it'll be display message. In this case, it'll be equal to 0. And we'll do another assigned variable here. It'll be display message, and it'll turn it back to 1. So this series of actions here does nothing more than turn the variable display message to a 0 and a 1, an on and off each time I press the space bar. So it's changing the state of this variable. Next, we want to be able to have the message drawn on the screen. So in order to draw something, we have to use the draw event. So we'll add a draw event to our player object. And we need to add some actions to this. The first one is the draw self action. Next, we're going to want to check in what state the display message variable is in. So we need an if variable. So we'll do if, and we'll check the display message variable. And we'll see if it's equal to 1. If it is equal to 1, we want to draw a message. So I'm going to do a draw value. Here. So draw value. I'm going to not draw a caption. I'm just going to draw a message, and I'm just going to say this is a message. The X and the Y, we want to make it relative to the player, because in this case I want the message to follow the player around, and I want it to be slightly above the player. So I'm going to leave the X position alone, so it'll be in the center of the player. But it'll be in the same X position as the player, but the Y, I want it to be 50 pixels above the player, so I'll set that here. Now, we also need to give the text a color. So we're going to use a set draw color command here. Set draw. It's this little paint bucket here. If we didn't do this, it would set the color to black. And in our case, we already have a black background, so we wouldn't be able to see the text. So here I'll just leave this at the default of white. Let's go ahead and run this now. Now our character should be standing in the middle of the room, and if I press the space bar, we should get a message that appears above it. If I press the space bar again, it should go away. So you should notice this is changing states each time I press the space bar. This is, like I said before, a very important tool to add to your toolbox. Exercise 4, do an effect. GameMaker has some easily usable built-in effects that you can add to the game. So we're going to go ahead and add one at this point. So what we're going to do is set up so that when the portal is touched by the player, we're going to have a simple effect happen. So let me go ahead and make sure we got the portal open here. So within the collision with player object, we're going to add an action here. So I'm going to search for do. We'll pull that over here. In this case, we're going to do a firework type of effect. Yes, where we want to make sure we can either do it below or above objects, and we'll be talking about that here in a minute, why that's important. And I'm going to make it a large style firework display. We're going to set it relative to the portal. That's it. I'm going to run this and we'll show you what happens. When the player touches a portal, there should be this neat firework display that happens when they touch it. Exercise 5, depth. Depth is something that's really important in game design. It's the idea of how far away or how close something is to the person playing the game. You'll notice earlier when we did the fireworks, it said, do you want these above or behind the objects? So if I continue to play here, you'll notice that the fireworks display on top. So this is a depth issue. In this case, the depth of the firework is closer to the viewer, and the portal is further away. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how to make this work. First thing we need to do is create a new sprite. Actually, in this case, the sprite has been created for you. It's called Sprite Wall. Next, I'm going to create a new object. I'll call this object wall. And give it the wall sprite. And then open the room. Let me close the creation code here. And then I'm going to add the wall to the room. And I'm going to run the game. I'm going to move the character over, and you should notice when it goes over to the wall, it runs behind it. This is because when I place the wall in the room, it is given a closer to the player depth. This always happens when you place instances in the room, is the newer objects always have a closer to the player depth, and they're drawn on top of everything. Now, in this particular case, this isn't what we want to do. I want the player to be shown on top of the block. Now, the easiest way for us to fix this is to just change the depth that the block is drawn out at when it's placed on the screen. So let me go back to the wall object. Actually, in this case, I'm going to go to the player object instead. I'm going to give it a depth that will place it always above everything else on the screen. So I'll open the create event. We're going to assign another variable here. In this case, it's a built-in variable called depth. Depths are shown in in numbers. A 0 indicates the standard depth that everything is placed at when it's originally placed in the room. You can change this to make it closer to the person viewing the game, and you use a negative number to indicate this. A positive number means further away. So to make this closer than any other object on the screen, I'm going to give it a negative value, in this case -1. If I run the game now, and I move the player to the wall block, it should move on top of it. Exercise 6, layers. Now, we've already worked a little bit with layers in the rooms before, but we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about them now. So let's go ahead and open the room up here and make sure that your room editor window is shown. You do this by coming over here and turning on the room properties. In this case, you're going to want to be looking at the layer view. Alright, so when you look at the layers over here, there's always two default layers. One is the instances layer, and this is where we place all of the instances for our game. And one of these is the background layer. Now, the order in which these are placed in the room over here indicates the depth that they have. So a background has a further away from the player, the viewer of the game. Instances is closer. So from the bottom up indicates the direction in which the depth is shown. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a new layer to our game. We're going to call this, or this is known as the asset layer. So we're going to create the asset layer here. And you'll notice that the asset layer moves on top of this. So this layer would be above everything else in the game. Now we don't really want this here. I still want my instances to be at the top of the screen. So I'm going to move this assets down so it's between the two. So instances is at the top, then assets will lay behind that, and then the background lays behind that as well. Now what we're going to be doing within this asset layer, I can actually put sprites onto the screen. So we don't have to use an object if we just want a sprite to be drawn on the screen. In this case, we're going to be putting a title onto our room. So if you come over here to the resources window and click on the sprite, making sure that the assets layer is chosen, I can pull this out into the game and drop it down. So now the game will draw this sprite onto the game window for us. If I run the game now, the player should be able to move around. Once again, he'll move on top of this, and then he'll also move on top of this. This ends this video.